Hello, welcome to the presentation of Hotel M308. We're Team 8.3. Hotel M308 is an 8-year-old full-service 3-star hotel with 250 rooms located in city center. We're serving business, leisure, tour, contract, large group, and small group. We're experiencing self-economy with increased competition from other cities, and hotel facilities have not been refurbished since opening.
First of all, Hotel M308 is a 3-star hotel that offers good quality for lower prices. Our goal was to gain a greater market share and to increase our occupancy, and we decided to target transient during the week and both large and small groups during the weekends. Regarding pricing, we followed an undercut strategy, which means that we strive to keep our rates slightly below the average rate of our comp set for every segment and distribution channel.
We have analyzed the whole year internally and externally. We have noted two turning points, which are February and August. From February to March, the net profit has increased by 4-fold. In February, the number of rooms sold has increased by 6%, which has set a nice start for the first quarter. We have slightly increased the price from January to February, and an increase of 2% for marketing expense has made its effort. In August, we have reached our highest point in terms of total revenue and net profit. However, we started to have a slight decline in the following months due to the higher expanding and cleaning in November up to 20,000, whereas it was only 8,000 in October. Furthermore, a decrease of net profit in September is mainly due to our highest expense on advertising for the whole year. Overall, we have performed the best in quarter 3 as demand is higher per our historical data and checking that our price is constantly below the average of our competitors. Looking at the market penetration index, we can see that we have continuously maintained above the baseline for our targeted transient guests, except a slight drop in August, which was due to higher prices we set for the market. We have increased our rate by $10 for both weekend and weekdays, which we thought that we would still capture a large market share due to the past data indicating the peak season in quarter 3. Right after, we have decreased the price back to the same as July and September, which has brought back our market share. Further, we have made a mistake to suddenly change our strategy for channel management by the sudden large focus on direct channels, and it has definitely backfired us. We have realized that our market is rather price sensitive and will note that we will not dramatically increase the price in the future. Overall, our market share for group has dropped below the baseline in April, May, July, and November, and it is due to the RFPs that are captured by our competitors. Looking closely on the 3 graphs, the results are in line with what we have intended to do by focusing on increasing our occupancy, and thus consequently our ADR will be lower than the comp set. In August, we should have done a better job in terms of occupancy as shown in the index table. It is the only month where we have both the MPI and ARI still under 100, which resulted in low RGI. In the future, we have to increase the price to bring ADR up in order to increase RevPAR, while making sure that the increase in price will not allow the competitors to steal from us. Our worst performing month is January, where we have started out with relatively low prices, which can be the reason why there is a large gap between rooms sold and the net room profit. We have decided to have room cleaning in the very first month to better our quality later on, which has caused us to have fewer rooms to sell. Our best performing month is August, where we have peaked our highest net room profit, and it is because of what we have mentioned before, where we increased the price. Although we have fewer rooms sold due to the cleaning service that was done in July to August, there was a high demand in quarter 3, and it was right after the RFP in July, which resulted in a well-performing month. However, we have learned that we need to be careful with renovation during the peak season in the future, as it stops us from capturing more customers. Now, we have discovered that 9% of our revenue is derived from other departments rather than just rooms. On the second graph, it is interesting to point out that guest room entertainment has brought us 44% of revenue out of the total ancillary revenue. We do not have the satisfaction rate of some services and facilities, and thus we will recommend conducting a survey in the future, which will allow us to know what facilities are valuable for guests in a particular segment. We didn't notice a multiplier effect which could have brought us more revenue, and thus we recommend it to be taken into account for the future management team.
If we look closely at each segment, on both weekends and weekdays, most rooms are sold to transient bar segment. Concerning small group segment, more rooms are sold on weekends, which confirm to our strategy. However, in terms of number of rooms sold in the 3 categories of segments, most rooms are sold to the discounted segment. We should evaluate what we should focus on in the short term as it collides with our initial plan to target transient during the weekdays. In this table, we can see that transient bar is the segment with the highest profit contribution. Nevertheless, transient premium has the highest profit per room sold. Bar is only at 4th place in this regard. Transient premium's high profit per room sold is mainly due to the higher ADR charge for this segment. But, as we can see on the market share roll, our price remains attractive enough to attract more than our fair share for premium segment. Regarding tour segment, both the profit contribution and profit per room sold are extremely low compared to the other segments. This is why we do not recommend the future management team to invest resources in this segment, as it does not prove to be profitable. In the pie chart, we can see that discounted segment is the most profitable. We think there might be a potential to serve discounted group in the future.
Now we will analyze Hotel M308's weekends and weekdays performance. Last year, our weekdays had higher occupancy for every quarter, and this led us to think that it would be the same this year. However, our actual weekends occupancy rate exceeded the one of weekdays every month. In the second table displaying the percentage increase compared to last year, we can observe that the most significant change occurred for weekends occupancy. As we can see in this table, weekends occupancy has been higher since the beginning. During the year, the average difference between the two occupancy rate was of 2%, with a peak difference of 7.2% in June. This peak difference can be explained by several factors. First, between May and June, the overall market demand for weekends increased by 15%, while the market demand for weekdays increased only by 5 times less. Secondly, in June, our market penetration indexes were all above the average, and more precisely, we can see on the right-hand side that the penetration index for group went up between May and June and moved above the market average. This was mainly due to a decrease in large group rates, both compared to our own prices of the previous months and the prices of our competitors. In July, however, our occupancy went back down because one of our competitors received an RFP for the 4 weekends of the month. Overall, the difference between weekends and weekdays occupancy can mainly be explained by the fact that we charge lower rates during weekends. Here is an example for January, and overall we kept an average difference of around $7 throughout the year. In the last quarter, however, we decided to reduce slightly this gap in order to take into account the actual higher demand for weekends. That being said, our prices should have been adapted sooner to better fit the demand level, and we recommend the next management team to keep an attentive eye on the market in order not to lose potential revenues by not charging the optimal price. Now regarding the ADR and net rate, we can see that both indicators are higher during weekdays, and this is mainly due to the difference of prices and transaction costs between the two periods. Transaction costs are less important during weekdays as a greater percentage of guests book through direct channels. On the weekend, however, there is a bigger share of customers booking through wholesaler, which reduces the revenue actually received by the hotel. This analysis is another proof that weekends rates should be increased in order to compensate for the high transaction cost and improve weekends net rate. And finally, in terms of RevPAR, the two periods are quite similar. This is understandable as our ADR is higher during weekdays, while our occupancy rate is higher during weekends. Therefore, they counterbalance each other. Our recommendation for the next management team is to gather additional data in order to be able to calculate the difference in GOPAR rather than RevPAR, because GOPAR would be more accurate as it takes into account both controllable management expense and total revenues. And such an analysis would greatly help them to determine optimal room rates for both periods.
Our initial strategy was to utilize the billboard effect, where we have a comparatively higher percentage on our OTAs platform within the first and second quarter, and then focus on the direct channels during the third quarter to ensure maximum revenue. Our strategy somewhat worked as our percentage of revenue from direct channels went from 62% in June to 69% in August. However, the occupancy, ADR, and RevPAR indexes indicated that our overall RevPAR decreased dramatically compared to our competitive set during the same period. This may be due to the fact that we increased our emphasis on direct channels rather than on OTAs and GDS, which may have negatively affected our overall RevPAR as we were less visible in the online market. Faced with this result, we decided to place a bit more emphasis on OTAs and GDS in the following months to ensure a positive RevPAR index. For next year, we would recommend keeping our channel distribution on direct at 60%, OTAs and GDS at 20% respectively. This is because with more visibility on OTAs, we may be able to attract a wider variety of individuals who may return to our establishment and even book through our direct channels. Moreover, leaving OTAs temporarily when we do not need them to fill our hotel can result in a lower ranking score of your hotel in the OTA's search result, which may lead to less bookings through the OTA.
Overall, we have received positive feedback from our customers regarding our marketing and advertising, saying that our advertising is helpful, useful, and timely. And we can see that our average advertising across the year is around 5%, except for January and September, where total revenue starts to drop in September, and we fail to estimate the expense we should drop when making decisions. We believe our advertising expenses are well managed, since an advertising expense of 5 to 6% can generate an additional impact on our performance. When we make decisions for marketing and advertising, we firstly estimate next month's revenue and adjust total amount of marketing and advertising expense we can have for next month. Then allocate the expenses based on different distribution channels' respective demand. When we change the channel management, we adapt our advertising expenses accordingly. We also look at our spending compared to our competitors' spending and make sure we're spending more on segments we're targeting. For example, for transients on weekdays and small group on weekends, our advertising expense is always at the top 3 highest among 10 hotels. This shows that we're consistent with our strategy. Since we distribute our marketing and advertising expense based on channel demand and targeted segments, we want to see whether we allocated the right proportion of spending on each channel and segment based on the amount of revenue each one of them can generate. We can see that the proportion of marketing and advertising expenses by distribution channels do not correspond to the proportion of revenue each distribution channel generates, suggesting we're spending too much on transient and OTA and not enough on GDS and wholesale. The proportion of marketing and advertising expenses by segments do not correspond to the proportion of revenue each segment generates as well, suggesting too much spending on transient and group but not enough on discounted segment. We therefore recommend to study previous revenue cycle and revenue mix in order to better estimate the different expenses and align expenses by channels and segments with the revenue mix. Make sure advertising expense is no more than 6% and be consistent throughout the year. Moreover, since discounted segment brings in the most net room profit, we should put in more advertising effort into the segment. Since transaction costs on weekends are higher as people book more on OTA, we should encourage direct booking on weekends in general.
As our strategy, we aimed at an above-average quality and to maintain satisfaction level constantly above 60%. On this slide, you can see the schedule of our refurbishment and the respective satisfaction level. Overall, we managed to obtain an average satisfaction level of 69%, which is actually in line with our goal. In order to do our decisions, we would always look at the reputation of the past month in order to decide what to do for the next one. For future teams, we would recommend not to do the cleanings of the rooms during the peak period because it takes a lot of rooms out of inventory which could otherwise be sold. Here is the breakdown of how we spent our replacement reserve fund on different segments. As we spent rather conservatively, we had still 12% left at the end of the month. Because facilities are very important to our targeted customers, we recommend in the future to spend about 5% less on refurbishment and use up more of the available fund in order to increase facilities. Here you can see the satisfaction level for facilities, refurbishment and services for every month. Apart from the first month, we managed to obtain an average satisfaction level of 60%, which is actually in line with our goal. Moreover, we saw that our targeted customers had very similar expectations in terms of facilities and hotel services, but were more heterogeneous in terms of refurbishment quality and guest services. Therefore, we recommend for the future to increase the facilities before the peak period and not as we did during the peak period. Moreover, taking into consideration the previous recommendation, it would be possible to increase the facility satisfaction level even further without impacting a lot on the other areas. Lastly, we wanted to be positioned in the high quality and low price segment. Yellow is when our quality is about average, green when it is above, and red when it is below. It is clearly visible that we did not manage to be positioned where we wanted during the peak period. This is because our competitors spent a lot on improving their quality just before and during the peak period.
Therefore, we did not take into consideration enough our competitors' actions. For future managers, we would recommend not only to focus on having an internal quality level that is very stable, but also to take more into consideration the competitors' actions and the market fluctuations.
Since our overall strategy was to aim for a comparatively higher occupancy rate than our competitors, we were unable to compete with regard to the RFP as our overall displaced revenues were too significant. Therefore, even if we tried to fight for the RFP, the minimum rate we would have had to quote would still be significantly higher than our competitors. This leads to a decrease in our market penetration for groups during the months with the RFP. We would therefore recommend the future management team to establish an average booking curve and pickup matrix to better calculate the displaced revenue and be more precise in the calculations to quote a much more competitive and accurate offer. In conclusion, we would recommend to keep our current strategy for the short term. However, due to the instability of the market, we suggest the next managers to keep an eye on the competitors in order to adapt to their long-term strategy accordingly. If we could start over, we would have done a closer analysis of the segment we want to target to ensure that they have similar needs and expectations in terms of service and make sure that we target the right segments on both weekdays and weekends. Thank you so much for listening.